sweetest Polish man. And then next to East Side Foods and on to Plotkin's Deli. Mr. Plotkins, who was so incredibly kind and generous to his paper boy. First time I ever ate tongue. Plotkin's Deli. And I realized that for 3 years I delivered a wagon full of local news. And on this one block, on the east side of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, I experienced the world. The French, Italian, German, Irish, Polish, Jewish shopkeepers gave me a glimpse into a world outside this neighborhood. They gave me a glimpse into a world outside this city. They prepared me to find other downtowns, and find them I did. I lived in Chicago and Washington, D.C. I lived in Atlanta, Georgia. I lived in Portland, Oregon, San Francisco, California. And I lived in Los Angeles for 10 years. And I moved back in 2001 to the city of Milwaukee, where my dreams were planted and realized in communities all over this country. But I was formed by the neighborhood that I was raised in. I now live 2.5 miles from the home that I called home my whole life. 2.5 miles I ended up back in Milwaukee. Why I'm here? I am here because they've got the stories, because we're talking about the evolution of an East Side Milwaukee neighborhood. We're talking about Brady Street. I did a show called Around the Corner with John McGivern for 9 years. I now am doing a show called John McGivern's Main Street. Thank you so much. And our first season of Around the Corner we shot in the summer of 2011. It aired in 2012. In 2016, I started a 3-year relationship with the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, and I wrote essays, 1 a month, for 3 years. And I would love to share my essay with you on Brady Street, because it speaks to what I came to know and what they'll be talking about. Of the 65 episodes we've completed of Around the Corner with John McGivern, there are 2 communities that I've been familiar with my entire life. John McGivern's East Side and Brady Street. Brady Street is a relatively short street on Milwaukee's east side. It runs from Prospect on the east to Van Buren on the west. It is the heart and commercial corridor of this densely populated, close to downtown neighborhood. There's a grocery store, a bakery, a gift shop, a dry cleaner, coffee shops, restaurants, taverns, hair salons, tattoo shops, and churches, all of which make Brady Street one of Milwaukee's most unique, desirable neighborhoods to live in and visit. My childhood boys club was a half a block off Brady Street, so as a kid I'd catch the bus, the 15 Oakland, Delaware, on Oakland and Kenwood, and ride it to the corner of Brady and Franklin. The memories of that city bus lumbering through that iconic intersection of Cambridge Avenue, Farwell Avenue, and Brady Street is as clear to me today as if I wrote it yesterday. We spent time on Brady Street shooting for this show the summer of 2011. We talked with community activists like Julilly Kohler, who is here today, by the way. Hi, Julilly. Who has spent much of her adult life advocating for the businesses and residents of Brady Street. She described the joys and advantages of living in such a walkable, close-knit neighborhood. We also spent time at some businesses that have deep historic roots and are anchors to this community. I helped Joe Vella, co-owner of Shortino's Bakery, make hard rolls. He even gave me a lesson in a taste test in authentic Italian cookies. I stood in line at this bakery on Sundays after the Mass at Three Holy Women, or St. Hedwig's as we knew it growing up, to buy my pound of ham so I could get my 6 free hard rolls. My advice to all is to leave after communion so you don't have to wait too long. Don't tell Father Tim, I wrote in the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. We visited Gloriosa's Italian Market at their new location on Cass and Brady. Thanks to Michael, who showed us around, and to Eddie, who was at that time still working at the age of 90, who put me to work behind the meat counter. The store is beautiful and inviting and full of meats and cheeses and groceries that are hard to find anywhere else in the city. Just across the street, we browse through the shop known as Art Smart Dart Mart. Jim Bolden is the owner. They sell a huge variety of things that relate to play. Kites, darts, frisbee, disc golf supplies, pool cues, juggling, magic tools, and a multitude of crazy, off-the-wall, hard-to-find items. Trust me, you're either going to find something you will want to take home for yourself or something you'll want to give as a gift. Like the inflatable meatloaf I brought to serve to my Aunt Agnes. She thought it looked delicious. Yikes. One block to the west is a classic bar that has been on the same corner and in the same family for over 50 years. Regano's Roman Coin is a throwback to a time when there was a neighborhood tavern on every corner. Roman Coin feels like a shot in a beer place where you can play darts or bar dice and always run into someone you know from the old neighborhood. One more establishment that I would never miss, Zaffiro's Pizza on Farwell. It opened in the 1950s, and Mike Zaffiro, who was in the class behind me at St. Peter and Paul Grade School, grew up in the business and continues the tradition in the same storefront pizza parlor his father opened over 50 years ago. When you go, see if Marie or Terry can wait on you and tell them McGivern said to order the small Italian salad and the large Zaffiro special pizza. You will become a customer for life. I am. Have you ever closed Walski's? I have seen bumper stickers all over the country that says, I closed Walski's. We were told by Dennis Bondar, who was 2 classes ahead of me at St. Peter and Paul Grade School, the 4th generation of Bondars to own and operate this tavern, that the bumper stickers are all over the world. And he has pictures to prove it. This building originally stood on Brady Street. In 1907, Dennis's great-grandfather moved the building to its present location on Pulaski, where it's been operating as a tavern with a Bondar behind the bar ever since. The last time I was in Walski's, I was there with my mom, her friends, my brothers and sisters, my nieces and nephews. The crowd was all over the map age-wise and from every corner of the country. We were there late in the afternoon, and the only one disappointed we didn't close the place that evening was my 88-year-old mother. I'm writing this on a Saturday morning. Last night I ate what might be the best Thai food in Milwaukee. We ordered and picked up from Dynamite. We had great fresh spring rolls, a perfect red curry, and amazing fried rice. The place was packed inside and out, and people were waiting patiently for a table. Dynamite has been around for 5 years and has earned its place as a destination restaurant on Brady Street. Brady Street reminds me of the neighborhoods where I've lived or visited in other cities across our country. It has the historic makeup of Old Town in Chicago and the nightlife of Uptown in Minneapolis. It feels as diverse and eclectic as the East Village of New York City and has an abundance of food choices like the Richmond District in San Francisco. Father Tim Kitzke, the pastor of Three Holy Women and the Prince of Brady Street, summed it up simply and eloquently. He said, Brady Street has this great energy of diversity, but also a deep sense of tradition and history, but also an openness to the future. Brady Street is a neighborhood where anyone can come and find a place that feels just like home. My essay on Brady Street. So Frank Alioto wrote this book. Do you have it with you? You have a box full? I love the fact, but did you reason to take one, but they're $20. When we came to shoot around the corner, the Brady Street episode, John Gerda, our historian, said, I'm going to take the week off. And I'm like, what do you mean you're going to take the week off? Frank Alioto knows, to just have Frank talk about it. And we were like, we really can't do that. You're under contract. But we had a time and place to talk with Frank when you were at the firehouse. He let me slide down the pole. Oh, for Christ's sake. They made me slide down the pole. Frank has a real history on Brady Street, and he'd love to share his stories. Go ahead, Frank.
Give you a little historic background of Brady Street and some of the immigrants who influenced Brady Street, because that's the important thing. Influx of new residents with new energy, and that's been our theme all along. And that's maybe a model for the world. We'll talk more about that in the discussion. Let's go way back. 1860s, there was an unsuccessful revolt in what's now Poland. And the peasants were fed up with the monarchy and the ruling classes. And they were unsuccessful, and they came to the United States in droves, by the hundreds of thousands and then more than several million. And they settled in places like New York and Pennsylvania and Illinois and Wisconsin. Some became farmers in northern Wisconsin and established communities. But many Polish immigrants settled in Milwaukee. A lot of them, as you know, settled on the south side, where a large population got their foothold. But a smaller amount settled just north of Brady Street, in what was undesirable swampland between the river and Brady Street. Brady Street at the time was the northern border of Yankee Hill. And the business owners on Brady were Germans who had come before the Poles, and Yankees, who were actually East Coast people who came west, to the Great American West, as we were down. And so you had established German and English-speaking people on Brady Street. The Poles spoke Polish, not German or English, and they squatted in this swampland, and they began to build homes out of recycled materials because they had no resources, no money, no skills, really. They were peasants. And they built tiny little cottages out of recycled materials, and they even dragged houses, pulled by horseback from this downtown area as this became more commercial and more of an American city. Some of the homes around here, rather than tear down, the Poles would recycle them and drag them over rolling logs, pulled by horses, and establish this little community north of Brady Street. They did not trust, nor were they welcomed right away or embraced by the establishment, so they developed their own little storefronts in this neighborhood just north of Brady. Most neighborhoods have their stores on the main street, Mitchell Street or 3rd Street, which is now King Drive, and so on. The Brady Street area, Poles had businesses in their house fronts. So even today, dotted throughout the neighborhood are old homes that you can tell used to be storefronts. And I'll show you some examples of those later. Because they didn't have a lot of skills, they ended up in the factories and tanneries all along the Milwaukee River. Milwaukee was a tanning center for the country and the world. And there were over a dozen tanneries on the Milwaukee River, on the Water Street side and across the street on the Commerce Street side. So they toiled long hours. This is before unions. Long hours, 10, 12-hour days, 6 days a week. And with just the hope that their children would have a better life. This neighborhood had a very quirky presence. It was called Koszadori by other Polish neighborhoods, which means goat-yard in Polish. And it was full of geese, chickens, goats, some cattle, and lots of kids. 6, 8, 10, 12 children families. This was the most densely populated neighborhood in the city. City fathers were not happy with this. There were really poor conditions to raise a family in. Pulaski Street, you may wonder if you're familiar, is a meandering street in the middle of this neighborhood. That was a little creek that was an offshoot of the Milwaukee River, and it became filled with sewage from the animals, and the homes had no plumbing. So it was a very unhealthy and unpleasant and an odorous place. It was, as someone who really delves into history, it's amazing to look at old newspaper articles. And I put a couple up here in the slideshow. I'll talk more about that later. But the Sentinel and the Journal had articles that would mock and ridicule these people because of the way they lived. They called them the Polackers and the Polanders. They would complain that the poor kids were, they called them the swill children, were digging in the garbage of the people on the Gold Coast on Prospect Avenue for leftover food for their soups. And it goes on and on. The one thing that they did that united this community was their religion, their Catholic faith. And they established a little wooden church on Franklin and Brady, St. Hedwig's. But there was a faction. Not only was there strife on trying to assimilate and be a part of the larger East Side communities, but there was a strife building within the Polish community there. Half of the people wanted their children to learn English and to assimilate as quickly as possible and get a leg up. The other half wanted to cling to their Polish roots, their language, their customs, their religion. And this actually culminated in a riot in 1885. Several thousand people beat each other up, and the article in the paper said, Polanders revolt, or Polackers revolt. And it talked about how these people with names like Czech and Ski could not get along. And there was a bloody battle, and the rectory was destroyed. And a lot of people were hurt, no one was killed. Out of the ashes of that came a reconciliation. And they built the church that's presently on Brady. Imagine these people of such modest means building something that's 128 feet in the air, and beautiful cream brick. Not just the physical presence of it, but what it symbolized in their faith and in their growing back together. And I think when we talk about community, we recognize in the things I'm talking about themes that are common today: accepting immigrants, learning the language, people toiling in less than desirable conditions. So there's kind of an underlying theme, and when you study history, you realize we've been through this before. The things we talk about today that divide us, we've been through this before, and there's hope. So that's the theme of this, community. So that's a background of that Polish community that established itself near Brady Street and ultimately started to get a foothold and take over Brady Street itself. Fast forward to 1948. A 6-year-old Polish girl, Geraldine Orzechowski, and her parents moved into a duplex, 1756-58 North Humboldt Avenue. It was owned by an Italian family, the Aliotos. The 11-year-old son, Frank Alioto, was introduced to young Geraldine Orzechowski, and legend has it she ran up and kicked him in the shin. So here you have it, Polish and Italians not getting along. But 12 years later, they were married at St. Hedwig's Church. Those were my parents, and I'm the oldest of 4 boys. So again, riot and reconciliation. I lived on Warren Avenue till I was 6 years old, and then we moved to Bayview. I love Bayview. It's a great community. It's been discovered, but I always had an affinity for my roots, for that urban feeling, for that diversity that you find on Brady Street, always have. So my whole adult life, I'm back on the east side, and my wife Rochelle and I, 30 years, raised 2 kids a block off Brady. And we've been involved in the neighborhood. And as John mentioned, I was the captain of Engine 6 on Brady Street, so a lot of things went full circle. And I absolutely love the neighborhood. There is one little story that I want to add. When we moved to Bayview, and I met my first good friend, Mike, he was talking about having grandparents on Mitchell Street and grandparents in Cudahy. And I was like, why would you have grandparents in two different houses? I thought everybody had all their grandparents in one duplex. That's the package so you could visit them on Sunday. And we actually did visit every Sunday. And we would go upstairs to the Huskies, my grandma and grandpa, and watch All-Star Wrestling, Bowling with the Champs, and eat charnina and other things like that, and do some of the things that established Polish families might do. And then my nanu would bang the pipes with a yardstick. There were exposed pipes in his bathroom, and that meant the pasta was ready. And I have a new hip now, and part of that is probably from tumbling down the stairs to beat my brothers to the bowls of pasta and Sortino's bread. So these are fond memories of mine. But I realized later how unique it is to have all my grandparents in one house. So that's an interesting side story. I mentioned the slides. As I lived off of Brady Street, was interested in the history and the heritage, I became kind of the unofficial John Gerda of the East Side, I guess. And people dump pictures on me all the time. And I say dump, but I mean, in a positive way. I have thousands of photos of Brady Street, of the neighborhood, of the factories, of the businesses, of the families, of the schools, and I'm proud to share them. I have written articles about the stories, and I've done slideshows in the past, but it's been a while, I'm a little rusty, but hopefully this isn't too much of a distraction and you get a feel for some of the photos that I handpicked that relate to our theme today. And later on, I was told that if you have specific questions about a slide, I can narrate some of them and tell how they connect with what we're talking about, or can clear up maybe some questions you have about certain photos. So that's my little piece. I guess we'll move on.
Next up, Frank, is Pat Suminski, the oldest of 7. She was born and raised above the original Suminski Funeral Home on Brady Street, the 1200 block on Brady Street. Life has taken her full circle and she lives now at the same location. Growing up watching her father, Edward J., and her uncle, John P., help the community through their time of loss, it was only natural that eventually she would join her brothers as partner in the funeral business. This is Pat Suminski.
So one of the things that John wanted me to, that when we talked about putting together this presentation, was to talk a little bit about the generations that lived on Brady Street. And while John said I came full circle, I never really left the circle. I was born in 1949. As John said, my parents, my father at the time, owned the funeral home, which we'll talk in a second about how he came to own the funeral home. I was raised above the funeral home. I currently live in the apartment where my parents raised 7 children because I was lucky enough to live above a place that had 2 apartments, a working space that had 2 apartments. And just like Frank said, doesn't everybody have grandparents who live in the same building? I thought, doesn't everybody have, extra space up above to go down, or space down below to go down and play? There were 2 apartments above the funeral home. When my back apartment. But my father being one of those fellows that always wants to make sure that he's teaching his kids what needs to happen, he charged his rent. So really, I never left the living above the funeral home. I was lucky enough to stay there and remain on Brady Street all of my life, which is kind of like, I'm going to take a step back now. So how did I get here? What were the generations? So the Poles in my family were probably part of that group that came, as Frank had mentioned, in the 1800s. My great-grandfather, Martin, and his wife, Eva, came in 1873 and lived just north of Brady Street. They lived in a house, and they raised 8 children in the little house that they had. Martin worked for the municipality or the city for a while, and then also ran a saloon, which, as Frank mentioned, there's all these little storefronts in the neighborhood on Brady Street, so when you walk past, it was either a grocery store, a dry goods store, or probably was a saloon or a bar. Because the Poles, the Germans all enjoyed, that was their socialization, and meet each other. So one of the 8 children of Martin and Eva was John Suminski. John Suminski is my grandfather, and he established the funeral home, the original business on Brady Street in 1905. He did that in 1905 with one of his brothers, and it was basically, the original funeral home didn't start on Brady Street, it actually started in a house on Humboldt Avenue. The brothers ran the funeral home for about 11 months out of that space, and then Grandpa moved to a space on Pulaski Street, which is now, it was known as an organ factory. He then, and at that point, and think back to the early 1900s, they kept horses and buggies, so that was part of their business. And Grandpa established what was referred to as a livery, meaning, they would make buns from the funeral home, or in some cases, when folks got married, they had that fancy vehicle that they could drive folks around in. And that was in 1907. Grandpa then, at that point, decided that he was going to move to Brady Street. He bought some land on Brady Street. And Frank talked about Wolski's moving a building from Brady Street to Pulaski. The building that they moved is the building where our current funeral home is. And moved it to Pulaski Street. My grandfather bought the land and then had an architect or had plans drawn up for the funeral home that included 3 apartments and some space for the funeral home. My grandfather and his family lived in the apartment that I currently live in, above the funeral home, and my grandfather raised his 3 sons and his 3 daughters in the same space that my parents raised us. John I did very well in the funeral business. He was also an alderman for 6 years. During that time, he worked with folks in the neighborhood to tear down about 20 houses in the Pulaski Street area to build and to create Pulaski Street Playground because back in the day, as Frank had mentioned, there was places, they needed space for the kids to play. Stella, raised 6 children, and one of those individuals was my father, Edward J. John the 6 children were my 2 aunts, my 3 aunts, and my 3 uncles. My father and his brother John began to help out in the funeral home. Then the Second World War came. Both my dad and my dad's brother Ray went into the service. While Dad was in the service in Guinea, John and I passed away suddenly of a heart attack. So Dad never knew until 6 weeks later that his father had passed away. But he then became, he and his brother John became the owners of the funeral home. That's in about the 1940s. So how did my family then get to live above the funeral home? My father bought out each of his brothers and sisters. He talked to them about their shares of the property. My father met a woman, a lady, a young woman named Evelyn Terry, who moved to the east side of Milwaukee on Franklin Place, about 2 blocks south of Brady Street, with her identical twin sister Kay, to work at International Harvesters, because all the guys were in the war, so there were a lot of ladies doing their thing, working at many of the factories. Dad met my mom, and there's 2 stories about how he was. One is, and at that time there was a lot of bowling teams, so they either bowled at Century Hall or around. His brother was bowling at Century Hall. Dad had to happen to be with her. My mom's identical twin happened to be bowling. They struck up a conversation. My dad looked at her and said, "Oh, are there any more at home like you?" Well, the other story is that Mom, because she and her twin would go to different churches in the neighborhood. They'd go to Old St. Mary's, or they'd go to Cathedral, or they'd get to St. Hedwig's. St. Hedwig's at the time had, I think they called it pew fees or pew rentals or something. So my mom walked into church one day, paid her 25 cents to the usher, was my dad, who then politely walked over to her and said, "Excuse me, ma'am, it's really only 15 cents, here's your dime back." But that was his way of getting an introduction. And then they made their way over to Showbotters after Mass for, refreshments, etc., etc. Well, 2 years later, Mom and Dad were married in 1948. And they had 7 children that they raised above the funeral home in the 3-bedroom apartment that my grandparents grew up in. Now, of the 7 children, there were 2 sets of twins. I'm the oldest of the 7, and my twin sister Pam is here today. There's a set of twin boys, 16 months younger, that were born. And by the time I was 9 years old, there were 3 more. So there were 7 of us by the time I was 9 years old. And those, you ladies, you moms who have kids close together, you know what I mean. So they raised us about on the 2nd floor of the funeral home. The washer was in the basement. So can you imagine having 4 babies all in diapers, doing that kind of stuff? And living above a funeral home. Anybody remember what funerals were like back in the 1940s, 1950s? Usually you would go to a funeral and it would be 2 nights of visitation, and then the next morning you'd go to church. It was my mom's job to keep the 4 of us quiet during the time, and back then it was a very tough time that you wanted to keep the kids quiet. So my mom was very good with kids. Spent a lot of time reading stories to us and just kind of keeping us, quiet while the funeral happened. That would be going on downstairs. Everyone said they thought my mom was a saint. I guess I have to agree. they raised the 7 of us above the funeral home. Mom and Dad continued to reside at the funeral home on Brady Street. As I said, my sister and brother and I moved to the back, so we kind of helped out to do whatever we needed to do during that time when it came time to help with funerals. I was really not as interested in the funeral business, but my brother Ed and one of my brothers, Ron, in the 1970s were interested and went to school to become funeral directors as well. We were lucky enough that Dad continued to have relatively good health. So Ed and Ron were funeral directors that helped out at the funeral home. So now we're moving from the early 1900s to the 1970s, when my brothers were beginning to become part of the funeral home business. The funerals had changed a little bit by then, and so had the funeral home. I said that when it was originally built, there were 3 apartments. There was 1 down below, 2 up above. By the 1950s, just after 4 babies were born, they remodeled the funeral home, took out the lower apartment, because by now funerals had changed, and they started having funerals in the funeral home as opposed to in houses. And then they changed the facade of the funeral home. Then there was one more time that they did some renovations on the funeral home to close to what it is now. And that's when my dad, in 1983, decided to take down a house on Franklin Place. He hired someone, and together they took the house down rather than hire someone. So little by little, they took that house down, made a parking lot. We all know about parking on Brady Street. They made a 15-car parking lot and changed the funeral home to have a back entry, so that at least then families had a little more space to park, and opened up some of the space down at the funeral home. That was in 1983, 1984. It wasn't long after that my brothers then became the partners or the owners, as Dad was retiring and going into ill health. So Ed and Ron took over at the funeral home. I was still there, still living above. I was not necessarily directly involved with the funeral home, but as I learned, when I realized that when Mom raised us, another story is when we were in school in the 50s, there were a lot of friends who had moms who worked. And I always felt bad for my friends whose moms worked, because their mom wasn't there when they came home at night. And I always had, when we came from school or whatever, Mom was always there. And I always thought, I'm so lucky to have Mom who's not working. And I'm thinking, in my older years, I'm not married to have any kids by any means. But I thought to myself, what do you mean Mom didn't work? She had 7 kids, no dad in the funeral home. She worked her butt off. And oh, by the way, sometimes often became a surrogate mom for moms who worked and their families lived close by. Because if Mom had us out in the back playing, then other kids joined. So it was one of those kinds of things where, kids joined in. It was a neighborhood where everyone sort of got along. I was lucky enough to be able to continue to live where I lived and help my mom take care of Dad in his later years, and then help my mom as she developed Alzheimer's and take care of her, which is how I then moved back to the front of the building, and loved living there, loved being on Brady Street for some of the same reasons John talked about. Number one, there's this nice bay window that I get to look out of. And can you imagine the kinds of things that we saw from the 1916s to now, that Brady Street and how Brady Street has changed, who we've seen and how we've seen them. And so I enjoy being part of Brady Street and continuing to live on the street. That brings us up to the culture.
Julilly, do you mind, would you come sit for a minute? Do you mind? Or do you want to talk from there, Julilly? When we met twice around this day, and Julilly's name was mentioned, we called her and said, would you mind taking a moment and talk about your commitment to Brady Street? And when we met, what did you call yourself?
The interloper.
The interloper, Julilly Kohler. Could she have your microphone? Do you mind, Pat? Here's what I found. Can I just introduce you, Julilly? She's been around the block a few times in her career as a real estate developer, Milwaukee County Assistant District Attorney, and divorce lawyer. But she prefers strolling along Milwaukee's East Brady Street to admire the remaking of this historic district. Julilly was one of the driving forces behind the rejuvenated Brady Street neighborhood. As she said, it was a wounded street at one time, and now it's the city's most beautiful walking neighborhood. This is Julilly Kohler.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me? Brady Street is a magnet. I was living up in Sheboygan, near Sheboygan, and my husband was working down here in Milwaukee, so I wanted to be able to be close enough so that we and my kids could be here and not have to drive an hour back and forth. And I was looking around where to go to be close to downtown, and there was this wonderful little house on Marshall Street, the duplex. And I was walking around and, oh my God, look at this street. It's so interesting. It was just alive, and it had all sorts of things, and I realized, like the little house that I was in, it was visited twice a week by Peter, who had his vegetable truck, and we had a playground down the street for my kids, and some of the best groceries in the city, and I said, this is where I want to be. And it didn't take long to feel welcome enough so that it was actually, I could feel that I was getting to know people and people were welcoming. And I, at that time, was a partner and owner of an art store, an art gallery up above Sandix on a downer. And the city kind of closed us down because there were pick signs that advertised what was up there, and people didn't know. They made us take down the pick sign. So within like about a month, our business dried up. So we have to leave. And there was this building that is now Rochambeau that we moved into as a renter, and it had just recently been redone, and it really was wonderful. And so I decided to move the art gallery there, and it was next to Mima's, and it was Mima's that suddenly had brought back the street commercially, and it was just fascinating. It was this gorgeous place with fabulous food and a line of people out the front, starting a smaller line on Thursday nights, but by Friday and Saturday.
This one's louder. There you go.
Thank you. Oh, I can hear it now. Thank you. So it was Mima's that made it possible for me to think that I could move my art gallery there. So we moved that, and we moved into there and started making friends with Mima, because I thought, oh, this would be the place to hang some of our art. And Joe Magna said, oh, sure. And then I started doing it one day, and Mima came in and said, who are you and what do you think you're doing to my art? Which was gorgeous, of course. So it was like, oh, I'm sorry. I thought maybe I could. So anyway, that was an early partnership that went nowhere. But it was a friendship that has started forever because who could not want to go to Viva's? It was so good. And she was so welcoming as a hostess. And as I was sitting on my street, on my steps, when I was looking up and down and saying, Brady Street is looking a little sad right now, because up and down the street they had windows that were filled with sheets. Or if you look at what was Semizuchi's and is now the wonderful taco place, there were empty shelves that had fallen over with things that were still kind of had been on the shelves. And you could see the mice and the rats running around. So it was really depressing. And also because I was living on Marshall Street and the kids and I would walk up the street and go to Mima's for beautiful tarts and things like that. You'd see every once in a while somebody passed out in the alley between, and there were still hypodermic needles lying around it. I mean, it was pretty rough back then. And I thought, well, we could do something about that. And there were a couple of buildings that were for sale. And I mean, they were so inexpensive. It was like, I think it was what was the little coffee shop for a long time was $40,000. And that wasn't very much, but it still was low enough so that there was room for rehabbing. So that's how I kind of got into the different things that were on the street. And even though I was an interloper, people were nice enough to be helpful and give me ideas and things to do. And so we opened a coffee shop, and then, oh my goodness, just one thing after another. And then it was the old bank. Frank, what was the name of the bank? The People's Savings and Loan. And the little coffee shop that we were in, the People's Savings and Loan, I heard, used to court the woman who had the coffee shop. And that building is fascinating because it once was 3 stories tall, and they took off the top floor because that was a ballroom, but it was also a boxing room. And so if you look at the street in front of it, you'll see that there's a sign of a boxer underneath it because they had bare-knuckled boxing up there on that street. I mean, up on that floor. And then they took off the top floor and lowered the roof, so now it's only a 2-story building. I mean, it's just fascinating, the things and the changes that people did. So all these different things that were going on, one of the things that we were talking about is trying to get people together to make the street better. So that's when we had one of our good friends who owned one of the buildings down across the street from where the Massaggio is now, Ellen Callahan. She was very active and went up and down the street and talked to people about getting involved in the BID business, the Business and Improvement District. And she just literally went and got everybody in and brought everybody in, and we started the BID. And the BID business is to tax itself and use those surplus taxes, those extra taxes, to create improvements on the street. So we did all sorts of things, including getting new street lamps and putting up the street signs that has our Brady Street profile on the top. But one of the things that I'm most proud about is our art project. And this is what Pam Sesniak and this is, and we have copies of this book if people are interested, and a whole of Rachel and the Bit Board, and we have them and they're wonderful. This is the whole Brady Street with each one of the each one of the buildings, and in front of it, and one of the things that brought us together, in front of it is a pictograph of the history of each of the buildings. And I was on the arts board at that point and had fallen in love with public art and the purpose of public art. And what was wonderful is that Brady Street, a lot of people were mad at each other on Brady Street. I mean, Italian mad at each other. And I didn't really know what that meant until I found myself in the midst of it a couple of times. I mean it. And it was long memories. So what we did in order to have this, we created community meetings where people would come and talk about the history they knew about each building. And so our artist was there, and she came up with a pictograph for each of the buildings who were members of the Bid District. And so this is what this is. And I think it's just fascinating. And this little book, it tells every pictograph that they have done, right, with a little comment about what it is and why it is. So I think it's a treasure, and it was one of the things that actually brought Brady Street back together again after the Great War. And the Great War on Brady Street, it wasn't the rebellion you're talking about, but it was a rebellion by the neighbors against the Brady Street merchants because of the Brady Street Festival. There's a picture in here of the Brady Street Festival. 100,000 people. It was the first street festival in Milwaukee.
Here.
And it was the first one to be closed down by the neighbors. Oh, let's see. Yeah, the early 70s, I think it closed down in 71, 72. And it was really pretty disruptive to the neighborhood. They called, I mean, if you'll pardon the phrase, there was pissing and puking on everybody's front steps and porches. You'd come out the next morning and there were these bodies. It was too much drinking. And the neighborhood closed down the festival. And we still have one of the wonderful pictures of the festival at the Bid office. And so the neighbors were pretty much against the merchants coming together again because they were afraid of what might happen again. So instead, we had a kind of a history project. And these wonderful things that came up, like the first children's hospital in Milwaukee was on Brady Street. And that's down near and there was an accordion store there for a while. It's down at that part, I think it's Zionist. Yeah, Zionist now. But it's fascinating. So the next time, our whole idea about having public art was to encourage people to walk, not drive. So when you walk, you're looking down and you're taking your time. You're not in a hurry, and you're getting to know what's going on. And so it was creating community. That's what we were trying to do which is to create a place that was inviting and fun and welcoming and interesting because of the things that were going on. I mean, there's the Bavarian, where La Masa is now. That was a place that had live snakes and spiders and things like that there. It was very creepy. Pardon the pun. But it was the last thing standing on that place, that block where I built the Passaggio, which is now there in the 1200 block. So what was interesting is that I forgot who it was who owned that area, and they wanted to get rid of it, but there was a rush to try to make it historic, so people couldn't knock it down. Well, somehow it got knocked down during the night, while the historic request was pending, but it got knocked down, and that left that whole block ready to be redeveloped. But that's where the wonderful, what was the name of the restaurant? That was up front. It was on, and they were the first people that had the deep fried, yes, Nicolos, that's right, Nicolos, and they had the deep fried eggplant strips. Do you remember? Do you remember the first time you bit into one of those incredible creations? And so, who owned that decided that he could go bigger. So he knocked down that wonderful building that was on the street and moved it back to the old Hirsch's Laundry. And that was one of the first dance places in Milwaukee where the lights were going around and everything was dark and all you saw was the lights going on. And I don't know what was going on upstairs. I don't know. But anyway, that ended up falling into disrepair and getting knocked down too. So that's where I was able to build the Passaggio, and it has the parking lot on the back rather than the front, where a lot of things were done there. And the thing that was really wonderful about that is that what we decided to build, the owners of the bakery, the old meat market, came in and brought a picture one time of where it was, and somehow we had been able to create a frontispiece that almost looks exactly like that old one was before everything got knocked down. Really, really, really interesting, including the passageway that goes in, and the lower building here, and the higher buildings there. But we were trying to build something that was like Brady Street, which is where people would have the shops downstairs and live upstairs. Well, I tried to get funding for that and support from the local banks. I couldn't do it because it's called something mixed use, and they didn't have a category. It was either residential or it was commercial. I had to go to Chicago in order to get loans to build that, because they absolutely, they said, this doesn't exist. We don't lend on things like that. So it was kind of fun to do that, and now people are doing it everywhere. So I feel good about that. And it really helped create the community, which I think Brady Street in very many ways is today. So passing it on to you, this is the man. Next to Pat, and her mother Evelyn was out there shoveling snow. It was just amazing, and our walking, talking gatherer of history. Just impossible for this to happen, because it's a community. It's a community.
Thanks, Julilly. So I was reading the paper, Journal Sentinel, in December, right before Christmas, and this is what I read. The Very Reverend Timothy Kitzke. I thought, well, there you go, one very in there's good. Has been named rector of the Cathedral of St. John the Evangelist, the seat of the Archdiocese of Milwaukee. Father Tim is a well-known Milwaukee priest who previously served as the Archdiocese vicar for urban ministry. Father Tim's plate will be full, the paper read, just so you know, Father Tim. He will continue in his roles as pastor of the family of 4 parishes located downtown on the east side and in River West. They are Old St. Mary's, Saints Peter and Paul, Our Lady of Divine Providence, which used to be St. Mary's Czestochowa, St. Casimir's. Plus, he's still dealing with, not dealing with, but you're still kind of the figurehead of 3 holy women, which compromises 3 churches on its own, St. Hedwig, St. Rita, and Holy Rosary. I don't know if you follow Tim's schedule. You can if you call St. Peter and Paul and say, where is he celebrating? You can go to a website where we'll show where Father Tim is celebrating Mass. And you better get there early is all I got to say. Father Tim Kitzke.
Good morning, everyone. That's right. Good morning, everyone. Everyone, can we thank Jolie and the Historical Society? Let's thank them. And our fellow panelists, John and Frank and Pat. Right before we began this morning, Jolie came up to me. She said, "We have a little bit of some microphone things going on here, so we're going to give you the weakest microphone because you have the biggest mouth." It reminds me of the story, though. I never heard this story about a priest right before Mass was given a microphone, and it was one of those clip-on ones, and he was really flustered, so he goes out in front of the congregation on a Sunday morning. He says, "Oh my God," he goes, you could see he was flustered, and he goes, all of a sudden, and the microphone was on, all of a sudden he goes, "There's something wrong with this." And the congregation responded, "And also with you." So hopefully my comments will not produce the same effect in you today, but I'm going to just contextualize, because I'm going to kind of bring all this together, and then obviously we're going to have Jolie speak a little bit, and we'll have some question and answers, but there's obviously so much history. Obviously we're in the Historical Society of what was a bank. To let you know, I went into the vault before, and I was looking out at all of you, and I saw you all, and thank you all for coming. Give yourselves a round of applause for coming. Just let you know, those of us in the trade, I look out at you, you're a two collection crowd. Okay, so the model that I want to use in terms of my comments to kind of bring all together in terms of parish. Whether you're a Roman Catholic or not is not the point here, whether you're even a believer or not, because a parish in the neighborhood stands for something about the way real human community happens. Incarnate in buildings and in the lives and the hearts of the people that fill and create the stories of those buildings. I'll tell you a quick story about the model I'm going to use. So, 20 years ago, does anyone know the name Tony Maki? You know Tony Maki? You know the Tony Maki Chuck? Have you ever, God rest his soul, I did his funeral, but remember Tony, about this big, bowler hat, bow tie, mustache, and so all of a sudden he comes up to me. I was down at the Italian Community Center. Says to me, "Father Tim," he goes, "the boys and I have been talking." I'm like, "Oh, okay, what's up? What's up?" He goes, "We want you to be our chaplain for the Italian Community Center and the Italian community at large." And I all of a sudden looked at him and I said, "Tony," I said, "I'm really sorry." I said, "Io sono polacco." I'm a big Polak. And I do not have an ounce of Italian blood in me. And all of a sudden he looked at me and he goes, "We know." And he said, "Father," he goes, "you do all our funerals, you do all our weddings, you do all our baptisms. When we're sick, we hear you show up in the blink of a dime, you're in the hospital or in our home." He goes, he looked at me and all of a sudden he did this. "Your family." And that's the key to my part of this discussion. How neighborhoods make it is they provide the environment for us to be family. Regardless if it's part of our birth family, like that whole reality show that was your life, or your family touched so many lives, or you helped to create family even from the outside because you came and you saw a vision of some potential for connectivity. What I like about history, and Frank, you said it so aptly, what I love about history repeats itself. It's a story of life. Great theologian one time said, I love this, God created human beings because he likes a good story. God likes the fact that we're all a little crazy. You know, 24 years ago, actually it's going to be 24 years, this is June 21st, my 24th anniversary being here on the east side. I get a call from the Archbishop of Milwaukee saying, we're appointing your first pastor. And I was 39 years old, and he says, your first pastor is going to be on the east side. He goes, you need to merge Holy Rosary, which is Irish, and St. Hedwig's, which is Polish, and St. Rita's, which is Italian. He goes, you need to merge them. He goes, changing demographics, you need to bring them together, you need to merge them. Got to figure out what to do with those buildings. And he goes, you know, we've begun the process. He goes, they're all getting along. What a liar. Sorry. Oh my gosh, can I just be direct? I was appointed the pastor of those 3 wonderful communities. For the first 2 years of my experience on the east side, I was the most hated man on the east side. Everybody was mad at me. And you know what, I don't know if you know this, everyone, but I love to be loved. Okay? John, you know what I mean. You know, okay? You like to be liked. You like people to accept it. I came in, and I remember one time coming into a parish council meeting to decide what we're going to do, and I had three groups of people with their backs to each other. Because on the parish level, where we, especially as followers of Jesus Christ and people of goodwill, we're supposed to be bigger than all that, but you know what? Like Brady Street shows, we're human. And we're divided. And more often, we listen to our darker angels instead of our brighter angels. Do you agree we're living in rather disunified times right now? Isn't this point in history, and you know, it's been another cycle, it's been throughout all of our human history. What I love about Brady Street is it presents an opportunity for us to see that it's possible to be family even when we don't like each other. When we like each other, it's easy. But especially when we have diversity in things that sometimes pull us apart, we can still do it. Why I'm so grateful to the Historical Society presenting these kind of panels, and I hope you do this for a lot of the neighborhoods. I think our neighborhoods need to be more neighborhoods in which you live together, as a family does. Now, how many people here come from a family? How many people here really love people in your family? How many people have people in your family that you can't stand? Okay, if you didn't raise your hand, come to confession, okay? But in the middle of all that, a street like Brady Street, and I've been there for 24 years now, to let you know how we did it. I walked in, and eventually as I kind of brought people together, the way I had to do it kind of was the way you did it. You start listening to people, and you start respecting people, and you start also dropping seeds of potential. Seeds of dreams, seeds of way of being in the middle of all the craziness that can still produce meaning in life and love and joy. So all of a sudden, I remember one of the first meetings I had in the parishes, I said, we are not going to talk about buildings. Because buildings always fall apart. Also, our buildings incarnate. Look, there's one of my buildings. Look at it. Think about how much this guy loved that building. Think about how much the Statics loved that building. Think about all these people that you have the place that you call home. And it means something. But as human beings, we have to realize the adaptability that we need, that things change. Sister Ellen Barrett, who is a very dear friend of mine at Holy Rosary, was a parish principal there for 45 years. She had this little saying that I use as a little mantra for myself. Change is inevitable. Growth is optional. Change is inevitable. Growth is optional. So I think the stories of these neighborhoods, look at these great nuts. I love nuts. You know, it's just I do, seriously. I think we have a choice now, especially our neighborhoods. Do we want to grow together? Or do you just worry about the changes that are happening and fear together? There's a chance. I'm hoping that what Brady Street has done for us is it's possible. And I was talking about how we came together. Someone came up to me and said, Father, how did you come up with the name Three Holy Women? You know, that's kind of different, you know? And basically I said, well, it occurred to me when I was appointed to merge these communities in which I said, I'm not going to close churches. I think closing churches is bad for a neighborhood. And I just think to make them, closing any building is bad, but closing a church, if you think about it, it's a linchpin. So I said to the Archbishop, I said, I am not going to close a church. She goes, listen, you're the pastor. You can do whatever you want as long as you fill them and pay for them. So I said, okay, but then it occurred to me, because you know your name means everything, doesn't it? It occurred to me, okay, because he said, they moved along, they have a new name for it. There's been the Parishes, done this whole consulting process. And they're going to name it St. Joseph the Worker, kind of honoring our working class thing. I thought, I like St. Joseph. Even more than the nuns. I love St. Joseph, you know? But it occurred to me as I was thinking, and I was walking up and down Brady Street one day, I thought, you know, especially having the great history of the Third Ward, how can we not think about our dear friends in the Third Ward, that wonderful Italian neighborhood? How many of us cannot give thanks and praise to God for Our Lady of Pompeii Church, the little pink church? Even when you come off 794 and you see Pompey Square, think about all your ancestors that had all sorts of stories going on there. I thought, gosh, you know, St. Rita was the mission church of that. After the urban development knocked down the church, St. Rita comes into existence and it is set forth as now the new sign of Italian unity. And I thought, what about Holy Rosary? The actual name of Holy Rosary is not Holy Rosary, it's Mary, Queen of the Holy Rosary. That's the official, I looked in the legal documents. And then St. Hedwig. I thought, oh my gosh, right on the hill in Humboldt and Brady, this beautiful, beautiful. Named after St. Hedwig. I don't know if you know about what St. Hedwig did, but she's great. Oh my gosh. She was the Queen of Poland, and after her husband died, she takes her benefice, all her riches, and she gives it away to form orphanages and churches for the good of others, and enters a religious order and becomes a nun. I'm thinking to myself, okay, St. Joseph the Worker is replacing the name of three wonderful women. I thought, does anyone here else think that's a little unfair?
Yes.
So I went to the Archbishop, I said, I'm not going to name it St. Joseph the Worker. He goes, well, what are you going to name it? I said, Three Holy Women. And he goes, what? I said, you know, we have churches. Then I did this whole study, just to let you know, there's churches throughout the world. I found a church, 70 Holy Martyrs. I found a church, six loyal men. I found that. I was like, well, they can do that there. So I said, we're going to do it. And that way we can keep the buildings by their names, St. Rita, St. Hedwig, Mary, Queen of the Holy Rosary. But we can have a new way of being community in which we honor and respect each other in our relationships. And you know what? We're not only paying for them, we're filling them. So, lastly, we're thinking about what do we need to do now in terms of the future of Brady Street? Because I don't know about you, but are you worried a little bit about what things are going to be like for your kids and your grandkids? I think about all these young people. I think about we need to have areas, pockets in which people can understand, and especially our kids can understand that there should be safety, no violence, and flourishing of the human community and the common good. It isn't just the urban sprawl, the suburban sprawl. Isn't a city neighborhood a wonderful example of the fact that if we're going to do it, we have to have that sense of the common good together? And that's how we've survived here. That's how we've done it. We've not always gotten along with each other. Sometimes we've failed absolutely at it. And especially at this point in history, we can fail absolutely at it. I'm just thinking to myself, these neighborhoods have to be incarnate challenges to all of us. I'm challenging not only Brady Street now, I'm working at any place I go. As John mentioned, I've gathered on a few other churches since then. I'm in mergers, not acquisitions. So, yeah. But my job is just, you know, the other thing I say is I'm just in sales, not production. You know, I'm just grateful that our Lord called me to this and has called me to this wonderful community, because you know what, I don't do all the work, but boy, I certainly know how to get you to do your work. We can do better. We can love each other. We can respect each other. We can care for each other. Isn't that what a family neighborhood does? And accept each other as we are. That's the wonder of it. I just thought about the grace. I'll tell you a little quick story about Brady. Would you agree that, don't we have some characters on Brady Street? Do you have some characters in the Old Third Ward? Do we have any Italian characters? Do we have any Polish characters? Do we have any Irish characters? There. You know what? I'll be very, very direct here in my comments to you. You all are characters. Every person here is a unique instantiation, I think, of God's imagination. Kind of the craziness of life. I know a good number of you, and maybe you, everyone, we have some crazy people here. You know, that's just wonderful. So I'll tell you one little quick story. Okay, so back in the year, I was 1999. I was appointed in June of 99. I decided as I was moving into the neighborhood that I would make sure that I get to know the neighborhood. It was also at a time when there was the heinous scandal in the Catholic Church of priestly abuse. We all know that it's a crime, and I'm absolutely aghast at what happened with that, and there's no way we can ever say we're sorry enough. But on the other hand, I thought to myself, I remember one summer afternoon, I thought, I'm a priest, I'm trying to be a good guy, so I thought, I'm going to walk up and down the avenue and just go and meet people. And I know where my room and collar. Just go up. So I went into every store and every bar on Brady Street that afternoon. Everyone. Just a little sidebar thing. To this day, 24 years later, I have never paid for anything on Brady Street. Praise the Lord. So anyways, finally get to one end of Brady Street. And you know what I call our little Times Square down by Walgreens and Zephyr's, where all the streets come together right there. I was standing there waiting for the light to change, and all of a sudden, this Brady Street character came up to me. And let me put it this way: he had a lime green mohawk. Okay, remember the mohawk there? He was tattooed and pierced. This big bodybuilder kind of guy. And I thought, I'm on Brady Street. All of a sudden he looked at me and he goes, and he sees my Roman collar. We're standing there. All of a sudden he looks at me and he goes, are you a priest? And I said, yeah, I'm the pastor. I'm up in the corner and then over in Oakland and on Cass Street. I'm bringing these parishes together so we can be a family. He goes, so here's where I thought, okay, I'm going to tell you. You know what I thought at that point? Here it comes. Here it comes. With everything that's going on about priests, he's going to say something off-color, and he's going to make a judgment of me, and he's going to tell me exactly what he thinks about this crazy, ugly reality. So I'm there, and I said, no, I'm a priest. All of a sudden, he looks at me and he goes, Father, would you pray for me and my kids? It was at that point in the corner of Prospect, Brady, and Farwell, I swore to myself, I am never going to make a judgment about another human being. I think that says it all. You know, that's how communities flourish. You know, it only goes natural. We make judgments, and it's sad to say we have prejudgments. Sometimes virulent racism. But, you know, we got to work through all this. And I think Brady Street stands as a beacon of hope that we can work through it all. My mother would always say, you know, the way you're going to get through this, if you can't say something nice, don't say anything at all. All right, keep your mouth shut. Okay, so one last little final quote of that story. So the guy's there, and I looked at myself, well, I'm a priest here now. This is my territory. So I looked at him, I said, I think you and your kids should start coming to Sunday Mass right up the hill, you know, just come on up to Sunday Mass. All of a sudden he looked at me and he pointed to his mohawk. And he goes, Father Tim, look at him. And I said, I think it's fine. Just change the color according to my vestments. Everyone, so thank you so much. Thanks for being you today. And again, thanks for the stories of your lives. I think the important thing about a story is that you have to keep on telling it. And so we will continue to tell stories of your life.
asked me to mention that the vault is now an oral history lab. If you have a story that you want to share, if you have a history of your family, of a moment in this neighborhood, you should go into the oral history lab and you can, it's a 2-minute story. They have limited it to 2 minutes. I'm like, I can't do that. If you have a longer story that you really think should be shared and documented, they'll be happy to tape that for you. They'll be happy to record that for you. If you have a 2-minute, you should stop into the oral history lab right here. Come up, Jolie. Talk about what's going on in the building as well.
They don't want to hear from me. They want to ask questions.
But tell them what's going on in the building.
We only have, I just told you about the exhibit upstairs. It's Forward, Milwaukee in 175 years of Wisconsin statehood, and it's told through the eyes of Milwaukee citizens. And so we want to capture your stories, your oral histories, because if we don't do it now, when will we? We can't do it when you're dead. So come on in and record your stories. But I know you don't want to hear from me. You want to hear from these guys.
Is this the first of the neighborhood series that
Yes.
you've done? Are you doing more?
We're trying. It's more complicated than you think to get people to come up and talk about their neighborhoods. But if you have suggestions, I'm happy to hear them.
Good, thanks. Questions, anybody? How are you? How was your trip? It looked great, just so you know.
You know, and James and
Here, come on.
I went to a Garcia, and it killed me to own that building because the last time I was in there, I was with me and Mom, who I called Mom. I got the feeling, gut feeling, and I get gut feelings, I'm usually right, that corner that Tim just talked about, that it's a done deal that they're doing that hotel. What are your thoughts about that? I got the feeling that it's a done deal, and they keep saying it's proposed. So what is your feeling on that?
Do you hear her question? She's talking about that proposed building right there on the corner.
Where FedEx is. Where FedEx used to be. They're gonna tear that down and make a high-rise luxury.
You're talking about it being a high-rise luxury hotel. You say that they're saying that it's proposed. You have a gut feeling that it's a done deal. Is anyone here who knows the truth?
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay, here we go. You guys? Go ahead, Frank.
Right?
So
Okay.
the neighborhood had a meeting with the developer, and most people support it. Almost everyone there supports it. I think luxury's a little, it's not the correct term. It's a hotel, it's a neighborhood hotel. A high-rise, yes, but it's around a lot of high-rises. And it's being built on a site right now that's vacant and not very
I
nice.
didn't like the smoke and mirrors, but it's always proposed. What do you people think? And I had this.
Well, there were neighborhood hearings and we were able to air any concerns we had. I thought it was very
I didn't
constructive.
like the way it was, the spin of it, I should say.
I'm sure at one point it was proposed. And then we had meetings and ironed out some, like,
Well, there's nothing.
anytime there's differences or questions, you know, we were able to hear those and come together as a community, and I think there's by and large support for
Here we go.
having a hotel in Grace.
Stand up, would you? Here we go.
I have a question for Frank, I think, but I live in River West, and there's...
Oh, sorry. Sit down.
But there is a connection. So I like walking around the neighborhood, and I go by a frame shop. And there was like a little picture in the frame shop, black and white. And it looked so neat, because it was like back in time, there was like a grocery store, and then there was like a couple that, there was a wedding or something there. And then I was peeking in the window looking at it, and the guy came out, and I believe he told me it was your
That-
family's.
yes.
So if you could tell me a
So,
story about the
okay.
grocery store and what you did there or something.
What was your name, sir?
Mark.
Mark. What Mark's speaking of is in River West, And just to give a little background, so Brady Street was this established Polish neighborhood, but it was landlocked, and the river was in the way. So the natural extension of the Polish east side was River West. And that's where Polish immigrants continued to settle. And my grandparents' family were actually from River West before they moved into the duplex on Humboldt. So, yeah, on Frappy and Chambers, second building, then there's a vacant lot on the corner, was my Aunt Agnes Kirkevich's grocery store. It was just a little mom and pop shop. And that was my grandfather's sister. And then also the Gig Tavern on Dowsman and Wright was also part of that family. It was called Krushka's. So I do have River West ties as well, but that's a whole other episode. By the way, this is Father Tim's tab from Brady Street. He's bought that. He bought everything. And there's more.
I just wanted to mention to this gentleman, was the name of the...
Mark.
Was the name of the storefront Alioto's?
No, it was like Ellen or something. He told me
It was F&A Foods.
F&A.
Frank and Agnes Kirkevich.
Yeah.
And they had a beautiful sign, you know, we call them ghost signs now, when an old sign is fading, you can see like Schlitz and things like that. There was a beautiful sign on that building, F&A Foods, drink Zepp soda, and there was a picture of a 6-pack of soda. It was like 2 stories tall, and I have pictures of it.
Right.
That got covered, whitewashed over, unfortunately. And the frame shop's gone too.
Down by, he's across from the church now.
Right.
In 1933, St. Hedwig's was the largest Roman Catholic church in the Archdiocese. And so then what happens is that just as Hedwig's is the daughter of St. Stanislaus, because when they first were, all the Poles moved in from the tanneries, they had to go through the valley, and there was no viaduct, so they had to go through the valley. So they used to go to St. Stanislaus, and it would take a day to get to St. Stanislaus from Brady Street. And so then they petitioned the bishop. He said, you can build St. Hedwig's, which is right here. And then what happened is it got too big, so that St. Hedwig's, the daughter of St. Hedwig's is St. Casimir. And then the daughter of St. Casimir is St. Mary Chenstohova. Just as Rita's is the daughter of Pompey. Notice how even when we talk about church and church, it's always daughters and mothers.
It's like a bubble lamp.
Yeah, it's not.
Yeah, just to piggyback on what you just said. So these Polish immigrants on Brady Street would march to 5th and Mineral, which is where the original St. Stanislaus was. And that was the first Polish church in an urban setting in America. St. Hedwig's was numbered the second one, the offshoot. St. Joseph's went the other way as an offshoot.
Where did the Kossuths go?
The Kossuth settled on Jones Island. I think they just blended in everywhere, they assimilated. I'm not sure. I know some of the buildings from Jones Island were moved to Bayview. I don't know if the people follow it. That's a John Gerber question.
Okay, for Frank. Hi, my name's Angie. I'm watching your slides.
Yeah.
What I don't see is any pictures of the festivals from all the parishes. Because when I was growing up, that's a big thing, and I'm old enough to remember. Can you hear me? Am I talking in your ear? I shout it. I'm shouting. My sister hears me. So there's no pictures of festivals. I mean, that was a big thing. And I don't know anything about the Polish festivals. I only know about the Sicilian and Italian festivals. So you want to touch on that, or?
So I have like 4,000 slides on my computer. And there are 70 here. So if you want church festivals, see me after class.
There was a church festival. When you see Joe Vella with the Vada, that's one of our festivals. What happened really years ago, we used to have a St. Rita's festival. Then we had so what we decided to do to kind of bring a unity in the neighborhood is there's nothing better than getting a procession going. Remember in the third ward how they used to have that, and they had their statues. We did that, and that was what we did. That's where they have the statues, and then that's when people come and they pin dollar bills on the statues. And I tried to change it, they pinned a dollar bill on the pastor, but it didn't work.
It's like pin the tail on the dog.
Exactly. What do you guys say?
Did you say that
building built of recycled wooden materials, much like a lot of their homes were. And it was behind the church that's there now, on Franklin Place where the school is. And I do have a foggy old photo of it, the only known photo of that building, and it's not on the slideshow. But yes, and that only lasted like 15 years, I think, before they were able to build.
Right, and then the original school is right across from where Mima's was, right across. The original school is that's the school, and then the original convent is still there, the white clapboard house behind us by Edwig's, and so that's still there, the old convent.
Right.
And then the original rectory is on Warren now, next to Carl and Shirley Ferguson's house.
Yeah, they were really good at recycling.
Yeah, they moved the original rectory at Hedwig's over to.
Right, and High Hat Lounge, which is a popular Brady Street tavern. Before that, it was the Iron Inn. That was the original school. It was bought by Joseph Polchinski, and he moved it 2 blocks. It sounds so easy to move a building nowadays, but picture 1800s. They did it a lot. There were even newspaper articles about all the streets being clogged by moving buildings because it would take days.
Father Joe, how long were you at St. Hedwig's?
5 years. I was at St. Hedwig's 5 years, but it was 24 years on the east side. He's going to beat me. But I spent most of my time at Holy Rosary, the Irish parish.
What's your last name?
Haas.
Okay.
And then, of course, I spent 5 years on Brady Street at St. Hedwig's. It's kind of an interesting move that a German guy like me would go to an Irish parish and then would go to a Polish parish. But it all worked out. Only thing I want to say is St. Hedwig is a Bavarian lady. And she married the Duke of Silesia, and he became the King of Poland, and then she became the Queen of Poland. Jadwiga.
Where are you the pastor today, Father?
I'm retired.
Are you from
retirement? It's a wonderful parish.
I love we chatted before when I came in. Would you share how old are you?
90. There's a great pastor on this east side. But he's really made this place for operating.
So, for those of you who aren't familiar with the physical makeup of what we're talking about, St. Hedwig's, which is the landmark in the middle of Brady Street, is just a few blocks away from the Irish parish they're talking about, Holy Rosary. And St. Rita's is just a couple blocks southwest. And they were all Catholic parishes, but different language, different cultures.
I'm going to add on to that story. They had a very difficult choir master at St. Hedwig's, Polish. And somehow the choir decided to leave and said, "You've all went over to Holy Rosary." So then when I got to Holy Rosary, we had a lot of Polish people because they were the choir people. But they went there because the choir mistress at Holy Rosary was a woman named Mary Magdalene Gruber, the great aunt. Her great uncle was Franz Gruber, the writer of Silent Night. So it was a great musical thing. So I hung around with those people, and of course Century Hall, center of the Polish neighborhood to the north. That's where I hung out.
The duplex that I mentioned that my parents grew up in was on the line of demarcation between Little Poland and Little Italy. And really, if I have 2 city directory pages on the slideshow, you can look at them. One is almost 100% Italian, that was like Jackson Street, just south of Brady, and one was almost 100% Polish, and it was Arlington Place. It used to be Sobieski Street, which was all Polish, and we're talking just a couple blocks apart. And, somehow we all eventually got along.
And also, it did show you how things, if you take your time and pray and think your way through and try to create a family, it works. We now have a new St. Rita's Church on Castle. First Catholic church built in the city in 100 years. But how that came about was, when I was first assigned, they said, there's developers that really want that property. And we're talking like millions of dollars worth city property right along Van Buren there. And so I remember I kept on holding at bay, selling it until I know that for us the Holy Spirit would tell us what to do. And so then finally the developer came and said, you know what we'll do is, he goes, if you sell me the land, he goes, I'll build you a church and sell it back to you if we can connect it to what is now St. Rita Square, which is keeping the neighborhood alive, especially with some of our elders. We all know that we don't want just a lot of bars on that young people come from others. We want to honor the tradition of having elders too. And that they should be able to stay in a safe and good neighborhood. So he built St. Rita Square, which is 115 senior citizens places. But then I sold him all that property. I sold him the building, I sold it him for $1. And then after he completed the church, he came to me and he goes, I'm ready to sell you back, your church. And I said, all right, I'll give you $1. Okay.
My father lives in St. Rita Square, which is now an elderly project, where St. Rita's church was. He went to church and school at St. Rita's, but he's in memory care now. And he looks out his window and he says to me, where's St. Rita's? And he's sitting on top of it. So he went full circle.
Yes.
I'm Pam Suminski. I just want to mention there was a lot of talk about different restaurants on the east side. Well, we happen to have owner of Pitch's restaurant.
Started in 1942, correct? And Pachiro is the name, so it's Italian, even though Pitches chopped off the other little part. Welcome.
The ribs are delicious, and I find them very reasonably priced. So get that bill out.
Just like
Sir.
Joel, question for Father Tim. I've heard, Father Tim, that you have said, I want to know if this is true, that if the three holy women parish joined with St. Peter and Paul, that it would be called Three Holy Women and a Couple of Great Guys.
That's it. You did say that. I did say that.
Anyone else? Yes.
So if each of you could add one thing to Brady Street that you think would improve it, what would that be?
Did you hear the question? If each, you did, very good. Go ahead.
put me on the spot. One thing with Brady Street. Can someone else go?
Acupuncture, yes. I think we need a good acupuncturist. I'm thinking that one of the things that the BID has done, and I think is wonderful, is creating community festivals and things. We have our wonderful pet parade, which brings people from all over the city, and it's just so curious and fun. And I think there are other things too, like our art program in May. I mean, there are things that really are special, and we get all sorts of people to come, and that helps create community.
Yeah, I would say we need to do more community gathering, and just to get together and talk more. I don't know about you, but COVID really did it to me, and I'm just really glad to be back and to see all these human faces and interactions. And so I would say I would agree with you. We need more festivals. I'll tell you a quick story. I have time for a quick story. Last Brady Street Days, so we open up now. St. Edwig's on the day of Brady Street Days. We open it up and then we send out mission teams to go to all the partiers and bars and they take those little vigil lights and we ask these younger people to go and invite people to come in to the church and pray for peace and an end to violence. The neighborhood should be beacons of hope. So they go. Last time we opened up, we had the Blessed Sacrament out and there were 700 candles lit in the church. And it's great. And then myself, my associate, and a couple of the other priests, we're there, we're vested. And if anyone wants to come in and maybe talk to a priest about things spiritual, go to confession. There's nothing better than happy hour confessions. But I think I like more community festivals where people come in. I think people from the outliers should experience what a neighborhood can be. So I agree with you, Jim.
I think if I were to think about it, the firehouse that was decommissioned years ago is sitting, it's not sitting empty, but it's not, I don't think, used to its best potential. And I think it would be a great place to do exactly what we're talking about. Community meetings, whether we want a police kind of a thing. So I think that would be one of the things that I would go for.
Somebody else yelled out firehouse. Who was that? Thank you. Should have been obvious to me because I served there. I was on the Milwaukee Fire Department for 32 years and I was captain of Engine 6 and it was a neighborhood institution. And thank you for reminding me, but I would like to have a firehouse back on Brady Street.
All right.
It's not just because you get quicker response when you have a heart attack or you burned your food or something worse. But we were a center of community. We fed people's dogs. We had tourists come and talk to us. We could be ambassadors for the neighborhood and for the city. So a lot of firehouses, especially in suburban areas, are just there. I mean, thankfully they're there and they do serve a purpose, but I don't think there's another neighborhood firehouse like that one where you were that involved in the community and was as much a fabric of the community. It's almost like you were in Brooklyn, New York, in the old days. And I do think that it's depressing to go by there and said change is inevitable, and I've come to terms with losing that. But that was a really good point. We could use our firehouse back. And there's been a squeeze on cities. We're getting a lot less revenue from the state, from our own tax dollars. And we've been forced to close firehouses. This isn't something that's taken lightly. And it's not, I think, a good thing. So fight for your firehouse.
So I want to say that it was the center because we would always have our annual chili festival there, and then we had a chili competition as to who had the best and sometimes the hottest. But it was a great place to gather. So I think it could be a place that we could have our meetings where more people would come to our meetings and hear what's going on and help plan, because we need a lot of volunteers. For instance, when we do the pet parade, there are always people that can sit and do things and can help register people and then follow